Imagine walking into a courtroom expecting justice only to be met with bias before you even say a word. That's exactly what happened to one woman, except this case had a shocking twist that left everyone speechless. It started like any other routine case. A judge known for his strict and sometimes questionable rulings sat at the bench, ready to hear what he assumed was just another defendant's case. A black woman stood before him, calm, composed, but before she even had a chance to properly speak, the judge had already made up his mind. He barely glanced at her case file, hardly listened to her words, and with a dismissive tone handed down a fine, acting as if she was just another person passing through his courtroom. The woman didn't argue. She didn't plead. Instead, she did something that caught everyone in the courtroom off guard. She reached into her bag, pulled out her ID, and placed it firmly on the table. The room went silent. The judge's face shifted from firm authority to sheer disbelief, because this wasn't just any woman standing before him. She was the chief prosecutor, the very person who had the power to stand on the other side of that courtroom, prosecute cases, and uphold the law. For a moment, the weight of what had just happened hung in the air. The judge, who had assumed her guilt without a second thought, suddenly realized his mistake. But by then, it was too late. The entire courtroom was watching, and there was no easy way to undo what had just unfolded. But the real question is, what happened next? How did the judge react? And more importantly, what did the prosecutor do in response to being so blatantly disrespected in a place that was supposed to stand for justice? This story is one you won't forget, because what came after this shocking revelation changed the entire dynamic of that courtroom in a way no one saw coming. Stay tuned, because you won't want to miss how this plays out. The judge's eyes darted between the ID and the woman standing before him. His fingers tightened around the gavel as if gripping onto the last bit of control he had over the situation. The courtroom, which had been moving along in its usual rhythm, was now frozen in complete silence. Even the court clerk, who had been busy typing, had stopped mid-keystroke. The tension in the air was thick, heavy, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. The woman, the chief prosecutor, remained composed. She didn't smirk or gloat. She simply watched, her expression unreadable. But her silence spoke louder than words. The judge swallowed hard, his face slightly flushed as he finally acknowledged her position. He knew he had made a terrible assumption, and now, standing before one of the most powerful legal figures in the district, there was no easy way out of it. People in the courtroom started exchanging glances, whispers spreading through the benches. Some recognized her name now, realizing they had seen her before, but never like this. Never standing on the other side of the bench, being treated like just another case to be rushed through. It was a rare sight, and the impact of what had just happened was sinking in fast. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the moment. "Well," he said, his voice forced and uneven, "it seems there's been a misunderstanding. But was it really? Or was this just an example of how quick some people are to judge based on nothing more than assumptions?" The prosecutor finally spoke, her voice steady. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated, letting the word linger in the air. And with that, the room braced itself, because what happened next would change everything. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His usual confidence, the authority that made him feel untouchable in this courtroom, was slipping away. He glanced at the bailiff, then at the clerk, as if looking for some kind of unspoken support. But there was none. The moment was his to own, and everyone was watching. The chief prosecutor remained calm, but there was an unmistakable weight behind her words. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated once more, her voice steady but firm. "You didn't ask me a single question. You didn't review the case file. You saw me and made a decision immediately." The courtroom was silent except for the distant ticking of a wall clock. The judge opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. What could he say? That he had been too hasty? That he had let his biases cloud his judgment? His reputation as a strict but fair judge was starting to feel like an illusion cracking in real time. A man sitting in the back row leaned forward, whispering to the person next to him. Another woman, dressed in a business suit, frowned as she typed something on her phone. The energy in the room had shifted. This wasn't just an awkward moment anymore. This was something bigger. The kind of moment that could spread beyond the courtroom, the kind that people would talk about. The prosecutor took a slow step forward, keeping her gaze locked on the judge. "Tell me, Your Honor," she continued, her voice unwavering. "Would you have done the same if I looked different? If I walked in here dressed in a different suit? If my name sounded different?" The judge's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He knew the answer, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. And now the real question wasn't just about this one case. It was about how many others had gone the same way, unnoticed, unchallenged. The courtroom wasn't just watching anymore. They were waiting to see what he would do next. The judge's fingers drummed against the bench, his mind racing for a way out of this. His authority had never been questioned like this before, not in his own courtroom. He He could feel the stares, the weight of every person waiting for his response. This was more than just an awkward situation now. It was a moment that could define his career, his reputation. The chief prosecutor didn't break eye contact. She wasn't raising her voice, wasn't showing anger. Yet somehow, her calm presence felt more powerful than any outburst could. She had spent years in courtrooms like this, but today was different. Today, she wasn't the one arguing a case. She was the case. And the judge's silence was speaking louder than words. One of the attorneys in the gallery leaned forward, clearing his throat. "Your Honor," he said cautiously, as if testing the tension in the room. "Perhaps we should." But the prosecutor cut him off without even looking away from the judge. "I don't need anyone to speak for me," she said, her voice unwavering. "I just need an answer." The judge exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of his desk. "I may have acted too quickly," he finally admitted, his words forced, clipped. "But the ruling still stands." A murmur ran through the room. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow, tilting her head slightly. "So now that you know who I am, you acknowledge a mistake, but refuse to correct it?" Her words cut through the air like a blade. The judge shifted in his chair, glancing at the court clerk as if hoping she'd offer some kind of distraction. But no one was coming to his rescue. Then the prosecutor did something unexpected. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick file. With precise movements, she laid it on the judge's bench. "You see, Your Honor," she said, tapping the folder, "this isn't just about me. I've been tracking cases in this courtroom for months. Cases that have one thing in common: your rulings." The judge's face paled. He stared at the folder but didn't touch it. The tension in the room reached its peak. Everyone knew what was coming next, but no one dared to speak. Because whatever was inside that file could change everything. The judge's hand hovered over the file, but he didn't open it. His expression had shifted from defensive to something else, something closer to fear. The weight of what was inside that folder was pressing down on him, and for the first time, he looked truly uncertain. The courtroom held its breath. The prosecutor didn't move, didn't blink. She had been preparing for this moment, waiting for it. The file in front of them wasn't just about one case. It was a collection, a pattern, proof of something bigger than a single mistake. And the judge knew it. Finally, with slow, deliberate movements, he reached for the folder and flipped it open. His eyes scanned the pages, and as they did, his grip on the document tightened. The room was silent except for the faint rustling of paper as he flipped through case after case. Names, dates, verdicts, all laid out in black and white. Then suddenly he stopped. His entire body tensed. Something on the page had rattled him. The prosecutor watched him closely. "Interesting, isn't it?" she said, her voice level. "See, I wasn't just looking for bias in your rulings, I was looking for something else." The judge's throat went dry. He stared at the document, his jaw tightening. Because buried in those pages was a case he thought had been buried for good. A case where a ruling had been changed at the last minute. A case where a name had been removed from public records. A case that should have never been found. The prosecutor stepped forward, lowering her voice just enough to make sure only he could hear. "You recognize it, don't you?" she asked. "Because that's the case that could end more than just your career." The judge swallowed hard. The tension in the room had shifted again. What had started as a confrontation was now something far more dangerous. Because now it wasn't just about bias. It was about a cover-up, a decision that had been made in secret, one that had just come back to haunt him. The judge's face was stone, but his hands betrayed him. His grip on the folder was too tight, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. He was exposed, and he knew it. The prosecutor could see the shift in his eyes, the silent calculation of his next move. But there was no way out of this. Slowly, she leaned in just enough for her words to land with full force. "You changed the ruling in that case," she said. "Altered records, buried the evidence." Her voice was steady, but the weight of her words sent a shiver through the courtroom. "And now here we are." The judge exhaled sharply, his mask of authority slipping. His mind raced. He could deny it, he could fight back, but it was all there in black and white. And worse, she wasn't just anyone. She had the power, the influence, the reach to make sure this didn't just go away. The courtroom remained deathly silent, all eyes bouncing between them like a high-stakes chess match. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, the judge muttered, "What do you want?" The prosecutor let the question hang in the air for a moment. Then she straightened, gathering the file and tapping it against the desk. "I want justice," she said simply. "Not just for me, for everyone who's been in this courtroom and never got a fair shot." The judge's jaw clenched, but before he could respond, the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A man in a dark suit strode in, his expression unreadable. Several people turned, recognizing him immediately. He wasn't just anyone. He was from the state's Judicial Oversight Committee. The prosecutor didn't even glance back. She already knew he was coming. She had set this moment in motion long before she ever stepped into the courtroom. The judge sat frozen as realization dawned. This wasn't just an argument. It wasn't just a case. This was the end of the road. And then, just as the tension seemed unbearable, the prosecutor turned slightly, a hint of something unreadable in her expression. "Oh," she added, almost as an afterthought. "One more thing." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small recorder. With a single click, she replayed their conversation, the judge's own voice admitting his actions, sealed in undeniable proof. The judge's face drained of color. The courtroom erupted. The judge didn't move. He didn't speak. His own words played back at him, filling the courtroom with undeniable truth. The weight of it all crashed down on him in real time. There was no talking his way out of this, no shifting blame or brushing it under the rug. It was over. The members of the Judicial Oversight Committee exchanged glances before stepping forward. "Your Honor," one of them said, his voice firm but controlled, "we need to speak with you outside." The judge swallowed hard, his hands gripping the edge of the bench as if trying to steady himself. But there was no steadying what was happening. His career, his reputation, his power, it was all slipping away in front of a room full of people who had once feared and respected him. Now they only looked at him with quiet judgment. The prosecutor remained still, watching him. She had fought too many battles in rooms just like this, had seen too many people crushed under the weight of unfair rulings. But today was different. Today the truth had won. As the judge was escorted out of the courtroom, a murmur spread through the crowd. Some shook their heads, others whispered to each other, still processing what they had just witnessed. The prosecutor turned, gathering her things, but before she could leave, a woman from the gallery stood up. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the space, reaching every corner of the room. And then another voice joined, and another. A ripple of quiet gratitude and acknowledgement. The prosecutor gave a small nod, then walked toward the exit. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a message had been sent. No one, not even a judge, was above the law. And as she stepped out into the hallway, she knew this case was only the beginning.